An update from NASA on those two astronauts who are spending a lot more time in space than they had planned. Not much of an update, but NASA does say that Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams are doing great and they're keeping busy.
And that's great news. Remember, their trip was only supposed to be a week. Now they've been on the International Space Station for more than 2 months. And we just found out when NASA will decide how much longer they'll be there. Joining us now, CNN Space and Defense correspondent Kristen Fisher and retired NASA astronaut Leroy Chiao. Kristen, let's go first to you with the update that I know you were saying isn't a huge update, but they just want to make sure that people know they're monitoring this situation. But what did NASA say about when the crew can return to Earth?
So they started the press conference by saying no major announcement. So right off the bat, you know that we're not going to get a hard return date for these astronauts. What they did say, though, is that they are pushing back the flight readiness review. That's the meeting of NASA officials across the agency where they get together and they make the determination, is this spacecraft safe for those two astronauts to fly back on? And so they've pushed it back to the end of next week or the beginning of the following week at the very earliest. And so I asked the NASA Associate Administrator, Ken Bowersox, I said at this last press conference last week, you said it was middle of August. Now you're saying end of August. I mean, is there a drop dead end date for when you guys have to make this decision? And he told me, we're reaching a point where that last week in August, we really should be making a call, if not sooner. And the reason for that is consumables. That's what he said. So things like food, water, oxygen, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That there have been resupplies, but that's the point that we're getting to. So they really should know something very soon, but not yet.
So one of the things I found interesting in this update was that NASA acknowledged there were internal disagreements about what to do. Did they give any specifics on that?
The crux of the disagreement is Starliner's propulsion system safe and reliable enough to do the next big, tricky, risky maneuver, which is that deorbit burn? Can those thrusters orient the spacecraft in the right direction so that its heat shield protects the astronauts from those super high temperatures on re-entry? So that's what they're debating right now. Clearly there are some people either within the agency or within NASA who say, yes, it is safe. And there's also clearly some people who say, no, they just don't think it's worth the risk. So that is exactly what they're going to be debating at this flight readiness review, which is now pushed back again to end of next week or beginning of the following week.
And then maybe we'll have an update. Dr. Chiao, if they come home on the SpaceX craft instead of the Starliner, I'm told their Starliner spacesuits won't be compatible. They would need SpaceX spacesuits. Chris and I were just talking about this, like a Dell Max situation is kind of what it sounds like. But how do they tackle that problem?
Well, it's one of these things where, the suits, the pressure suits that are worn inside the vehicles are very different. And so the one that Butch and Suni wore for the Starliner would not be compatible with the SpaceX Dragon. So what they would have to do is send up two Dragon spacesuits or SpaceX spacesuits or pressure suits. But those are kind of custom made and fitted. So they would have to approximate the size, maybe build them a little larger than the custom fitted ones. It could be done, and so of course these suits are only used in an emergency. I mean, you're wearing them, but they only pressurize if you lose cabin pressure or there's some other emergency, which is very unlikely. But that would not be a big issue, I don't think.
Dr. Chiao, you might be very well equipped to give us some context on this question. You spent 193 days in space. Obviously, these folks have been up there for about 2 months, so there is a notable difference. But when you're talking about the potential for consumables to be running low and they're not sure exactly when you're going to get home, talk to us about the psychological impact of that on someone who's out in space.
Sure. Yeah. On my Expedition 10 mission, we were up there for 193 days, so about 6.5 months. And during the first part of our mission, we had a food shortage and we also had a water shortage. The Expedition 9 crew had gotten into our food and we actually had to ration food for about a month. and we each lost 5 to 10 pounds. So it's no fun. It's manageable. It's doable. But yeah, consumables, as was mentioned in the NASA press conference, that's going to become, more of an issue. Of course, they have regular resupply, and I'm sure everything's working out just fine so far. But that is a question. And then the matter of, hey, when am I going to come home? That's the part humans in general don't like uncertainty. And so if you flew up there expecting to come back in 7 to 10 days, and now here you are over 2 months and not sure when you're coming home, it's got to have you scratching your head a little bit. But on the other hand, Butch and Sunny are consummate professionals. Astronauts like being in space. I'm sure NASA planners and schedulers love having the extra hands there to help out. And so by and large, I'm sure everyone's in good spirits and everything's going well. But Jeff, Butch and Sunny have got to be saying, hey, come on, guys, let's figure out when you're bringing this down.
Get a plan. I
They're
also always
looking at the watch.
Yeah,
for sure,
go back
like-
to the fact that they didn't get to take their suitcases with them.
Yeah,
or their
they
luggage,
don't have their-
whatever
their-
we would
their
call
personal
it,
luggage.
their space luggage.
Dr. Chow, one more quick question for you. If you had even the teensiest doubt in the Starliner being able to get back home, would you jump in it, or would you wait until, I believe it's February of next year, that they can hitch the next ride to get home?
Right. So it would depend on what the engineering teams have discovered. And of course, we don't know all the details. As you pointed out, there seems to be some internal disagreement. And so if the result was, hey, look, we're not exactly sure why those 5 thrusters failed on approach, but we are very confident that the remaining set of thrusters and capabilities are intact, and here's why, then I would be comfortable in getting in the vehicle and coming down. But if they come back and say, well, we don't really understand what happened and we can't really agree on a root cause, that causes a little bit more concern. And of course, we all look back in history, look at the accidents that we have had, particularly most recently on Columbia, a couple of decades ago, yes, but still, there was an internal disagreement between the engineers. Some thought we needed more information, get some assets to take some pictures. Others saying, no, it's totally fine. And the resulting catastrophe, has leaned heavily on the agency since then. So I would be more on the conservative side, I think, unless the technical team was able to come back and say, we are very confident that everything's fine. We don't fully understand why those 5 failed, but we know that the rest of them are going to be good.
Yeah, good to be safe, and maybe just order some pizza up there and replenish the food supply. Everything will be all right. Dr. Leroy Chow, Kristen Fisher, thank you all so much.